Hi, my friend, it's Danny here from projectmaniverse.com, real world technical project management for beginners. And in this video, I'm going to explain what the project lifecycle is. I'll tell you what it is, I'll explain why it's important you understand this as a project manager, and then I'll go into some of the details and the specifics of the project lifecycle. So let's jump in. What is the project lifecycle? Well, essentially it's a framework that breaks up your project, the entire length of your project, into chunks, into sequential phases. And the key word there being sequential, because they must be done in order. And we call it a life cycle because they're always done in the same order. And this project life cycle is very common among projects across the industry, across different forms of project management. It's always this similar kind of life cycle. Slight disclaimer, sometimes these phases are called different things, but generally they follow the same life cycle, especially IT projects, which is what I'm talking about today. There's pretty much only a certain set of phases you can have, and that's what your project life cycle is. So it's basically breaking up your project into phases, sequential phases, and giving a framework to the project. So that's what a project life cycle is. Why it's important? Several reasons. Number one, I sort of just alluded to it. It's very common among the industry. So if you go into a new role as a project manager, you'll be expected to understand this and you should be able to recognize it and get stuck into it. Number two, it's quite a useful tool. It's quite good for breaking up and chunking up your project into more manageable phases and manageable chunks, and it helps you with the planning process, especially if you really don't know where to start with your planning. You can always refer to the project life cycle. Let's at least start there. Let's break it up into these key phases. Now we've got some kind of starting point for our plan. Also, you need to understand this because the project life cycle, often at the end of each phase of the cycle, you've got some kind of governance forum to get through before we can go to the next one. It's quite important because projects are expensive and we need to put checkpoints in place to ensure that we are getting the best out of the project is going to be a success, and we're not just wasting our money. So these checkpoints are put in place because sometimes the decision is made to can the project, to stop the project. So you need to understand when these checkpoints are, and they are often at the end of the life cycle. Who's going to be in these governance meetings? Usually the project sponsor or the project executive or the senior leaders. Some important people come to these meetings and they will assess a list of criteria which will tell you whether you can exit the current phase and go into the next one. And there'll be certain deliverables you have to have completed, certain documents you have to have done, certain risk assessments that need doing, and they'll generally just check on the health of the project. Have you got a lot of risks? Have you got a lot of issues? How much money have you spent? If everything looks good, then the project is allowed to continue to the next phase. Now, often two phases will slightly overlap. That's very common in project management, so don't worry about that. But generally, you can't go to the next phase until most of the first phase or the preceding phase has been completed. So that's a good reason why you should understand it. I think that's pretty much everything I was going to cover in terms of why you should understand it. I'm just thinking, was there anything else? No, that's pretty much it. So let's move on to the specifics now. So what is this project life cycle? Well, as I say, it can vary from, not industry, but from company to company. But the most common one that I have seen is define is your first phase. Then you've got build, then you've got test, then you've got deploy, and then you've got your project closure and benefits. So that's define, build, test, deploy, project closure and benefits. So let's go through each one. Actually, before that, there is a preceding phase, which is quite a small phase of the project, so it doesn't usually get included in the big phases. But that is the project mobilization phase, where you're mobilizing the project, you're getting the team together, and you are creating a business case for the project. You need to be able to articulate and capture why you're doing this project, roughly how much money you're going to need, and what's the overall general design of it as well. So often you'll need a little bit what's called seed money to do that. So a bit of money to pay for yourself as a project manager. You might need an architect to help you, maybe a little bit of a BA's time, but just enough money to get the basics of the project in place, think about what kind of team you need so you can pull together this business case and then take it forward to the appropriate governance, get the okay, and then move on to the project lifecycle proper. And then you go on to the define phase. And the define phase, as the name suggests, is all about defining the project. So what's your scope? What is the scope of the project? You might want to put together a project charter, although to be fair, this is all about real world technical project management, and in the real world nobody cares about the project charter, nobody reads it. So if you can avoid doing that, I wouldn't bother. It's a waste of time. But if you have to do it, just treat it as a tick box exercise and just put as little effort into it as possible, because once it's there, it's kind of forgotten about. They say it's a live document, but it isn't. Just doesn't. No one cares about this document, so don't worry about that. Anyway, so project charter might be one of the things you have to do. You might want to pull together some critical success factors. What are the things that must happen to be able to make the project, to be able to call the project or deem the project a success? Do another video on that. That can be interesting, a bit political sometimes. Things like requirements gathering will happen in the define phase. You might want to pull together a budget, a more detailed business case, a project plan. All these initial documents are done in this define phase before you can really get going with the project. The design as well, the solution, maybe a high-level solution, maybe an OTE, an outline technical estimate. Sorry, an outline technical estimate is a very high-level cost impact assessment from your IT department. And sorry, that's usually done in the mobilization phase before you go into the define phase, but thought I'd mention it here. But that's your define phase. So getting everything planned out, getting all your scope documents ready, your design documents, getting really ready to go before you start building. Then the next phase is your build phase, and that's when you start building the thing you want to build or create. That's where you get your engineers in, they start coding in a dev environment, you get going with all that, and you'll build out the entire solution in your build phase. And that's pretty much it. So you might have a few bits of documentation in the build phase, things like a configuration document. A lot of IT projects are all about configuration of an application rather than just pure development, or it can be both, but you'll get a summary of the configuration. So if you want to do the project again or understand how the application has been configured, it's all there in some kind of blueprint. You get technical specs sometimes. You might get a few technical documentations in the build phase, but often most of it's done in the preceding phase, so you're ready to go and start building from day one of your build phase. So that's your build phase. Then you move on to your testing phase. And of course, that's where you start really testing everything. You'll go through all your testing phases, your system testing, your system integration testing, your user acceptance testing, your non-functional testing, your regression testing, all the testing phases, thoroughly test it all. And then when that's all been tested and everything's been signed off, you move on to the next phase of the project, and that's your deploy phase. That's when you're actually going to put your application or software or whatever it is you have built into the live environment, and it's available for your end users, your customers. So that's a really big deal. You go live with your product, it's there, and then you're in warranty. And warranty is basically a period of time where the project is still open, the project resources are still available to support with fixing any issues in the live environment, should there be any. So you haven't just walked away and left the business to fend for themselves, or left the customers to fend for themselves. You're still there to support, sort things out, get people up to speed with the application, make sure they understand how it works, and just be there to hold their hand in a sense. So that's your deploy phase. You deploy it, and then you're into your warranty phase, which usually lasts about a couple of months. You might have some specific criteria before you can exit the warranty phase. Like, for example, you can't have so many issues in the live environment, so many defects. You've got to close all your defects down and make sure you've got a clean run of the operations running with no issues before you walk away from the project and close it down. So the last phase of the project is the project closure. And that's basically where you'll close the project down. You'll typically do some kind of handover report. So you'll hand over the project, everything you built, description of it. All the documents are stored somewhere to be used for future reference, a description of any outstanding defects or processes or workarounds the business has to do. And you'll pull that together. And the big one is a summary of any benefits you have achieved through the project. And benefits is typically equate to money. So have you saved money by saving time, or have you generated more profit by introducing a new product, for example, a new I don't know, any insurance product, whatever it might be. You want to document and prove that the project has been a success through your benefits. So that's done in this last closure and benefits phase. And sometimes you'll need some amount of time to be able to prove that it's been you've made a benefit, sometimes less. It depends what you're tracking really, and how difficult that is to track, and when you'll really see the impact and the increase in sales or whatever it is. So yeah, then you close down your project and once you've proven your benefits, and that's basically your project life cycle ended, and you can finally close the project and walk away. And by definition, a project must have a start and a finish. So once you've done everything you set out to do and you've proven the project has been a success and you've handed it over and you've done all your documentation, your work is done, and you can move on to your next project. It has actually ended. So that is what your project life cycle is. As I say, it pays to understand it. You'll have stage gates often at the end of every phase before you move to the next one, to prove that you've done what you needed to do, to prove that the project is likely to succeed and it's worth continuing to spend money on it, and you're likely to get the outcome and the benefits you wanted in the first place. Okay, that's the video. I'm going to wrap up there. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, and if you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe button, because I'm doing daily videos, about 10 minutes each one, and you'll learn a lot of the basics of IT technical project management. So if you're new to it, I suggest you check in and tune in every day. Okay, until tomorrow, take care.